The last time I saw your lecture was more than 2 years ago, maybe like 3 years ago, and it was incredible back then. I'm really curious what happened. What happened since then? So you've got your half an hour now.
Sweet, thanks. Oh, that's loud. I'm Dominik. I'm in a strange position at the moment, I have to say, because I'm in a transitory phase. I will just give you a little bit of introduction of what I'm doing and what I was doing and what I'm doing now. And just to let you know, I'm coming from philosophy, and then at a certain moment I realized that that maybe some of my friends are better at writing, you know, but I'm interested in things, you know, in materials, and I sort of try to figure out whether that's a valid and precise way of thinking, you know, and discovering new things. So yeah, I'm somewhere in the midst of this. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a review of the work that I was doing a little bit back, you know, back then, so that you know. Concerning also the inventions of certain kind that I thought I'm going to continue thinking of. So basically, you know, one of the first ideas was to treat you know, shapes and volumes as records of you know, either behaviors or you know, environmental patterns or whatever data. Yeah? So in that sense, it sort of is an idea of bringing you know, shapes into the territory of communications theory, and then therefore you can start measuring the capacity of the medium, just like you can do with you know, with language or with, you know, any other transmission channel. So, you know, we're talking about relation between the noise and the redundancy and the content. So, you know, basically I was creating, you know, things which are rather dense in information, you know, mixing several processes which are interacting and producing some things. I switched this to machines as well. So, you know, this is a self-referential machine from back in 2011 where, you know, it's basically not connected to any computer. It's a computer itself, basically. It's the only thing it does, it observes the traces it leaves, and it goes around them. And, you know, it feeds back, and it goes, and it goes, and it just makes these piles. But basically, the interest is in specificities of media. So, so I very quickly started realizing that there is a relatively fun potential in utilizing media for their specific aspects. So in this case, you know, I started making architectural sketches, but since they were done in a computer, that means that they had particular resolution. I was sticking to a screen resolution. I started pushing pixels around. Yeah? So I started, you know, making operations on pixels, and, you know, flipping them around and doing all sorts of things, and then, you know, searching within this for patterns, and so on and so forth. And then, you know, this idea of sketching, you know, in generative time-based domain started evolving into creating little applications where, you know, you would interact with, you know, either physics engines or, you know, any sort of complex systems dynamics. And then, you know, that would be recorded. So the, you know, the process of you being confronted with a medium and, you know, talking to it, having a conversation. So, you know, drawing something, this thing reacts and moves, and then, you know, you start rereading this, and then you start imagining things on top of that, and then you know, you go on and you go on. So it's a, you know, it's a Dadaist technique pretty much. It's a, you know, it's referring to automatic drawing techniques, techniques of Dada. But, you know, within generative domain. So, you know, and these sketches would result in funny shapes. Another one with, you know, catenary structures. So, you know, I was really sticking to most cliché examples of, you know, of what architects would play around with, and then, you know, just make things out of them. Yeah? So, but always focusing on the resolution of the amount of information that is contained within a shape. And then, you know, it started shifting into sketching on top of G-codes. So, you know, we have machines, and then, you know, we can start, you know, manipulating geometry that we put into the machines, but we can actually also start manipulating the machine codes itself. So in this case, that was an application where you would take the data of the G codes and you would see all these lines, and these are actually paths, and then you would start sort of messing around with this, and then students would come up with with sort of particularly addressing certain areas and studying, okay, so now it's going to start sagging, now it's going to start aggregating more, now it's going to do less, and so on and so forth. And creating these objects which are medium specific, let's say. Let's go on. Oh, maybe let's just move back a little bit. I show you a little animation. I'm sorry, I really had no time to make a presentation. I was extremely busy last week, so it really sucks. But so concerning the drawing, I was sort of insisting on treating the drawing seriously. Is there any volume that we can have? No. Okay. So basically, what you're seeing here on the screen is something that comes directly from a sketching app. Yeah. So it's not a refined geometry of any kind. I mean, you can obviously see that this is nonsense, right? But basically, the idea was that okay, so what if we start sketching and then we immediately put it into first-person perspective and we start going through the sketch. And then rereading it back. So started introducing this sort of second layer perspective on top of the drawing. And then what's happening within this particular application is that whenever a person is moving through this, or there are multiple people moving through this, these paths are recorded, and also the glances, so where the attention is directed. This information is recorded, and it results in this sort of point clouds of both pathways through the shape, through the drawing actually, and places of focused attention. So you can see the sort of lines of the site, and so that was the idea. Again, just not to, basically to treat drawing as it is and start digging into it on more than one level. Right, just let's skip this. Oh, stop it. All right, so we were somewhere here. Shit. Huh? F11. F11? But you have to click it. Cool, sweet. So then, I started also shifting in terms of my practice, because I started collaborating with people doing, on one hand, sort of hardcore automation and robotics, and on the other hand, with craftsmen, and I started playing around with interfaces which are meant for drawing, but and this is a very crude prototype. Obviously, it looks rather funny and clumsy, but basically it's a six-axis manipulator controller thing, which this red thing somewhere there in the corner is actually accelerometer and gyroscope that you have in your iPhone. And what it does, it adjusts your camera angle, so you're basically drawing with this thing. It provides you haptic feedback, but then also it adjusts your camera, so basically the way you're drawing is just as if you would have this thing in your hand and start sketching on top of it. So these are the experiments. So just to conclude this part, I'm really interested in architectural drawing. So here you see a little bit of history of what was happening. How on the one hand you would see drawings which are performative. I mean, I'm talking drawing in a broadest sense. Yeah. So Gaudi's catenary structure is to me a drawing, because it's basically manipulating the mind, yeah. So what we imagine is possible, and then you have drawings which are more based on representation of an idea, like Corbusier's, or you have Kieslerian sort of sketching situations. When I started getting into architecture, it was like more seriously. Let's say it was like 2006, where Marc Fornès was starting his whole new approach to drawing, which I found revolutionary actually. So the idea that that objects that we're surrounded with at the moment are circulating at the same time as codes, as new media content, as animations, as pictures on your Flickr accounts, over Facebook, and at the same time as physical entities. And it's actually one chunk of something that is of mysterious nature and actually quite interesting to me. Now, what I'm doing now is sort of going broader into material culture. Yeah? So we're actually building musical instruments, but what they're doing is quite funny because I'm just going to skip through this. We're trying to take the idea of encoding big amount of information into surfaces which are performative. So all these things that you see here, like which are kind of metal looking, are actually buttons, and they're responsive to touch. And all the colorful things are lights, and they're dynamically displaying the content or the interaction between what musicians is putting in and what machine is doing. So and some of them are quite simple. Some of them, like this one, this is actually an evolutionary computation device that is running behind the scenes. But we're trying to push the idea of encoding the complexity of what's going on behind it into its surface, into its colors, into its haptic feedback. So we're experimenting also with, how can you activate surface so that it feels, with whatever transducer, so that it starts feeling like a rubber, or it starts feeling like like metal, or it's, you can do a lot of fidelity on utilizing this kind of industrial processes to communicate big amounts of data. And basically our instruments are part of bigger ecosystems. So, for all of you Grasshopper users, this is where Grasshopper comes from. These are these old analog machines which you connect with wires and they communicate. And right now we have a revival in the music industry of coming back to these machines. For the second part, a little text, and this is maybe already addressing Jan a little bit. Below the seamless surface of self-assuring user experience we constructed, trying to maintain the certainty of control, the network culture's undercurrent keep uncanny hybrids propagating. While they channel our desires, thus guiding our daily activities, we still believe in words and making sense, at the same time getting lost in hypertext, garden of working paths. We're convinced that in order to overcome the narcosis of gadget lover merely staring at big data, deflecting equipment is required, allowing rapid, intuitive actions under its petrifying glance. Artifacts of a high techno seem to be far more social, collective, and discursive than naive maker culture allows us to believe, yet much more transparent than media art's obscurantism, thus potentially becoming instruments of analog communication. Fusing expertise spanning from code to materials, from sounds to buildings, we are well equipped to manipulate simultaneously iconic, symbolic, and indexical components of such interfaces, or simply manufacture saturated traces of unfolding networked imagination. It's a little bit of a manifesto, let's say, of our group. And I will try to, within the next couple of minutes, explain a little bit of what I mean by that. So for that, maybe let's go back to the picture before. I will give you little intuitions, small little hints. There is this, and bear with me. I'm in the middle of figuring these things out. There was this novel by Neil Stevenson called Snow Crash, and the novel is shit, but he had this brilliant idea somewhere in the middle about a virus that spreads via picture. A virus that attacks, whoever can decode the content of a picture. So it's a very dense message that is encoded in a particular medium and changes someone's behavior. So first hint. The second hint would be the inherent stupidity of all content. So let me quote here Zizek, true Harman, and sorry for doing Harman, but I'm gonna afterwards explain also my problem with that. Okay. Let us engage in a mental experiment by way of trying to construct proverbial wisdom out of the relationship between terrestrial life, its pleasures, and its beyond. If one says, forget about the afterlife, about the elsewhere, seize the day, enjoy life fully here and now, is the only life you've got. It sounds deep. If one says exactly the opposite, do not get trapped in the illusory and vain pleasures of earthly life. Money, power, and passions are all destined to vanish into thin air. Think about eternity. It also sounds deep. If one combines the two, bring eternity into your everyday life. Live your life on this earth as if it is already permitted by eternity. We get another profound thought. Needless to say, the same goes for its inversion. Do not try in vain to bring together eternity and your terrestrial life. Accept humbly that you are forever split between heaven and earth. If finally one simply gets perplexed by all these reversals and claims, life is an enigma. Do not try to penetrate its secrets. Accept the beauty of its unfathomable mystery. The result is no less profound than its reversal. Do not allow yourself to be distracted by false mysteries that just dissimulate the fact that ultimately life is very simple. It is what it is. Needless to add that by uniting mystery and simplicity, one again obtains the wisdom. The ultimate, unfathomable mystery of life resides in its very simplicity, in the simple fact that there is life. Now, I'm quoting this, when Zizek refers to this situation as essential trouble in proverbs, in language, and in having a discussion. In that sense, because one can always flip these things, and in the end, you have to refer to much larger agenda in order to prove your point. What Harman does out of this in his book about Lovecraft, he says that the conclusion actually is that all content is sort of in vain. That actually objects are not reducible to what we talk about. When we refer to them, and therefore, I would like to sort of see our situation right now very similar to these funny moments of flipping in the culture that appeared, every now and then. So on the left-hand side, you can see the Book of Kells, which is one of the pages of Book of Kells. Which was one of the peaks of culture that already used writing, but it was still focused on audio. Yeah? So it was still the culture of talking. So back then, these books were not read in silence. They were talked. And they were remembered because they were scarce items. There was only one Book of Kells. So one had to read it loudly and remember all the content. Yeah? The change that happened was the invention of printing press. So when the printing press happened, suddenly these things became irrelevant, and you could have newspapers. And then this, I'm obviously referring to McLuhan, yeah? to the fact that media are doing things to us, yeah, are the messages. So on the right, on the left-hand side, you see Dziga Vertov, Man with the Movie Camera. So basically, a movie about a movie. So it was, it was next step when the idea of printing and what this media could transmit seemed to exhaust itself, and moving pictures started, propagating. So during the 20th century, we found ourselves in a culture of moving image, of a lot, dense flat information, you know, with all the YouTube channels and all the things that we're surrounded with. And what started happening very recently with, you know, with all the production of networked objects, you know, in the physical space, what you're doing with the robots, you know, what we're doing with dedicated computers that address certain things, you know, what all the geeks are doing with 3D printers. There is a funny reversal that seemed to me indicates a necessity of a different media to address you know, societal process of communication in a different way. And now I'm going to try to make a little bit of a leap in between what we're doing in terms of, you know, your agent systems and you know, whatever complex systems, and its importance as a tool, let's say, for channeling social processes. So this is maybe also something that might refer to Jan's talk. So for that, I would claim that, I mean, this is pretty obvious. What we're doing is we're mythologizing technology. Yeah? So we're actually building myths. And what I mean by that, let's just quote a little bit of Honko, the Finnish researcher. What is a myth? Myth is a source of cognitive categories, a form of symbolic expression, just like, you know, poetry or music. It's also a projection of the unconscious. And in that sense, you know, I'm referring to McLuhan and the idea, okay, if we have the global consciousness, we have the networks, maybe we also have the global unconscious. But let's go to this further. So myth is also an integrating factor of adaptation to life problems. It's a normative model of behavior referring to precedents. So, you know, some ancient cause or some, you know, fairy tale or, you know, mythical cause of affairs. It's a justifying factor for societal institutions. And it's a mirror of the culture, among other things. So what I mean by that is whenever we're, you know, agent-based modeling is the most spread out technique for creating policy at the moment, for making predictions in large-scale systems analysis, in foresight. So, you know, big agendas of you know, European countries are basically channeled through these techniques. So basically, this is something that we as a culture believe is a relevant tool to grasp our reality at the moment. And what we're doing as people involved in material culture, we're creating objects which confirm on a static level this state of mind. Yeah? Let's make another contribution to this and refer to duality of channels of communication. So I'm going to refer again back to my initial content discussion and things like this. According to Václavi, Bivin, and Jackson, we have essentially two channels in human communication, a digital one and an analog one. But don't be sort of misguided by what it sounds. Digital channel is words. Yeah? So digital channel means yes, no, if, then. Basically a situation where you can have a precise but very slow communication of whatever you want. On the other hand, analog channels are referring to relations. So, and they're not happening on the language level, they're happening on the level of how we look at each other, how we smell, how we dance, how we touch each other, and so on and so forth. And also they're processed by completely different apparatus in the brain. So these are hormonal exchanges and not neuronal spikes. Why is that maybe intriguing in this context? Well, what we are working with, so we as people involved in material culture, is actually an analog domain of relations, but not as if we would be two people talking, but on a societal scale. Yeah? So we're basically creating objects which communicate through analog domain, through analog channel, to whoever is surrounded by them, their place in the society and the belief system that is part of this society. So it's a funny responsibility that we have at the moment. And therefore, you know, what's connected to myth is the ritual. You know, one never knows what comes first, what comes next. It's a loop. Just to get to the point, we're part of ritual sort of circulation of symbolic material, and there are two types of rituals: the ones that confirm and the ones that transform. I believe we are only capable of creating objects or spaces which confirm what is currently the state of affairs, and maybe also state of the unconscious sort of trajectories within society. I believe, or you know, prove, I don't know, let's discuss it if I'm missing something. We might not have a capability to actually create transformative rituals. But what I mean by that is, for example, when you have people doing, you know, future prediction things, you know, in economy and in politics, they basically have tools to allow, you know, politicians or whoever stakeholders are around the problem to gather together, look at their result in terms of whatever graphics, charts, narratives, and create new directions for policy. I would be very much interested if we have these possibilities within our, you know, analog domain, but I'm not so sure. So the last thing is a sort of a conclusion. Building on top of this, I came up with an idea that I call saturation, and saturation would be an approach to the material culture, to the current material culture, which tries to evaluate products of this culture, of this material culture, somehow through bandwidth, through ideas from information theory. So, you know, the amount of information that can be compressed, irreducibly compressed into these shapes. And this happens on at least 3 layers: the iconic, the symbolic, and the indexical. The iconic layer means simply that something resembles something else. Yeah, so it's a house in the shape of a duck, let's say. A symbolic layer is a little bit more complicated because it deals, you know, symbols are ambiguous, and they're happening on a very unconscious level. You're decoding them only by the way that I have certain feelings towards these items, or I feel weird in that space, or you know, this thing is ugly, or this thing is phenomenally beautiful. But you wouldn't be able to tell more about it. You would be only able to say, well, you know, it feels nice. But there's all this processing, this symbolic processing that's actually happening behind the scenes. And then there's the third layer, which is inevitably connected to all of this, which is indexical. And this is something that a lot of you are also addressing. Indexical means the matter, how the medium that we're particularly working in becomes visible and becomes articulated and supports 2 of the previous layers. So yeah, that's it for today. Thank you very much. You know, this is something that I'm actually currently sort of experimenting with at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, where you know, I'm showing students, you know, all these funny applications, and we're building them together, and you know, they're drawing with them. And the idea behind it is that you know, one idea of utilizing algorithms is to run them from A to B and stop at some point. Yeah? Another idea is, you know, start them have some external inputs and end them. And the idea here is that the sense happens actually through immediacy of interaction. Yeah? So I'm trying to experiment a little bit with this situation. I'm not so much interested. I don't know if you're seeing, you know, these funny boots by François Habitanti, like, you know, the cellular automata boots, for example, right? Well, it's a process that just runs from A to B, and that's it. And basically, what it communicates is we have no access to these things. You know, they're just there. They're running. They're beautiful. I'm interested in other things. I mean, look at Neri Oxman's recent work. You know, this sort of funny women's pants, you know, which are like, you know, weaving. You know, in my opinion, this is total kitsch, because it's basically taking the medium too seriously. It's academic in Greenberg's sense. Yeah? So it's academic art in a sense of taking the medium and really trying to be serious about the medium and not about other artistic content. So this is, you know, I'm trying to overcome these problems in algorithms, and, you know, I quite departed from architecture. I mean, since the very beginning of my figurings out, I was kind of on the verge of mostly being like entertainer and not really like, you know, doing architecture. But, you know, right now I'm really, you know, you see that I'm also learning a bit about sound, which, you know, is actually a compressed volume of air. So it's a material culture as well to me. You know, I'm trying to make thinking on top of this. So it's far away from architecture, and I'm not an architect. I mean, you know, I believe that, you know, currently your imagination is so fueled with all the digital content that is out there, that the single thing that you need is just mirrors that are complex enough to get these things out. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Exactly.
What's your take on that?
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right concerning. Yeah, concerning yes, there are some people pushing certain envelopes and mostly doing things wrong, you know, doing things the wrong way around. And therefore, see, my position is political, yeah? You know, obviously, you know, you could always go back to the history, and, you know, you can always talk about Colosseum with the strata of societal, you know, information encoded in that being something that confirms particular order, and then having, you know, architects, I don't know, in the 80s trying to break this thing apart, yeah? And, you know, basically what I was referring to is that on the one hand, you know, there is individual sort of inputs that are showing up in the work. But we are at the moment in a very, very specific situation. We're concerning the network culture. We're absolutely overwhelmed with repetition of data. And it also seems to me has a tendency to make us blind on what the output actually is. Yeah? So my single sort of input here would be that it requires conscious effort to overcome the blindness, McLuhanian blindness of you know, of current media, and sort of go beyond it. Yeah? And concerning the double nature or sort of conformative versus transformative, it's I really don't have a good answer at the moment, because because basically transformation occurs via I mean, there are many strategies in rituals, but usually it has to do with overstimulation. So, you know, with creating a situation where you're so perplexed that you just cannot process this anymore, and then the wow happens, then the big thing happens, and then you're like, oh, okay, now I'm a different person. Or on the contrary, by the void of information, by nothingness, which starts creating, you know, which starts making your mind spin so fast that you're just like becoming a different person. And I'm just wondering to which extent, you know, we can do this through material channels. To me, this is a fascinating thought, and sort of important thought in terms of sustainability discourse. Yeah? So the way I would address sustainability in our context, which, you know, very often people would claim that we're doing some formal work and it's just like, you know, just some bubbles and some funny things, and it's just completely pointless because you have to put some green trees on the roof and then it's sustainable, right? I would think that actually we are doing a very profound work in terms of building infrastructures, material infrastructures, that make people behave in particular way. So believe in certain situations, certain complexity of things that we're dealing with, and change the actual behavior and not only the knowledge about the sustainability. So this is my big hope, actually, you know, concerning this discipline. Does it somehow?